No, it's not.
Okay.
So we're live now, so we can go ahead and start the study session.
Okay, good evening. I would like to call to order the July 27, 2020 Lake Washington School Board study session. Let the record reflect that all board members are present and participating remotely. All meeting participants will also be joining this meeting remotely in alignment with the current proclamation issued by Governor Inslee. This board meeting is being live streamed and will be available to be viewed on the district website. Regular board meetings and study sessions will continue to be live streamed on the Lake Washington School District website and posted for viewing within 2 days. The topic for tonight's study session is a discussion of the 2020-2021 results monitoring. Dr. Holman, will you lead us through that?
Absolutely. So earlier today, I sent the board a document that looked at the indicators that we have for our results monitoring. I also want to do just kind of a set around what we're actually discussing tonight. And so let me go ahead and pull that presentation up. And so results monitoring is really, it's the board's way of determining, is the district meeting the benchmarks that the board has set for overall organizational success. The Aspen Group defines results as the organization, or that results are, the organization exists for a purpose. That purpose is to provide benefits for specified clients or customers. Results policies define those expected outcomes and are intended to be the dominant focus of organizational performance. And really, results are what are the outcomes that, as a district, we are achieving. And so those are outcomes in terms of student outcomes. And with that, we have 3 different results that we monitor. Results 1, mission of the district. Result 2 is really our academic program and outcomes. And result 3 is really if you will, interdisciplinary skills and attributes, such as what types of skills do we want our students to have when they leave our school district. And so the current situation is that the board really has updated the results policies within the last year. Dr. Stavum came on board about 2 years ago. She has worked with the board during that time to update all of the results and operational expectations. And so we just completed the first cycle of results monitoring for the board with the newly updated policies. Part of that was diving into the superintendent's interpretation of those policies and identifying specific indicators. Given the impact of school closure in spring of 2020, many of the data elements are not available. That's why we're here tonight to really dive into what indicators did we have last year, what data elements did we use to align with those indicators, are they available, and if not, do we have a recommended path forward? And so tonight we need to review the current indicators just to determine those data points, and will there be different data points that we need to use to do results monitoring for the 2021 school year. And so I'm just going to start with the recommendation, and then let's go ahead and dive into the information that I sent you earlier. Really, our recommendation is around timing, knowing that the data that is available is going to change when we typically do our monitoring. And so we're recommending that result 1 come to the board in February, that result 2 and 3 come in August. That is significantly later than we typically have done results monitoring, but we'll kind of walk through some of the data elements and why we believe that's the best recommendation. Modifying a couple of our indicators is also part of our recommendation, and you can see there what those specifics are as we then get into the overall document. And so with that, do the board members have any questions about what we're doing, or kind of intent or purpose? Or Eric, do you have any comments about what the desired outcome was for tonight?
Yeah, so I think what the board had, the direction from the board before, leading up to tonight was, well, at first it started with concern that given the changes in the upcoming academic year, that our past results monitoring procedures would not be sufficient. And so we asked the staff to take a look at past practices and come to us with a recommendation. Director Bleaser, I see your hand just went up. Did I say something wrong?
Oh, no, I just had a quick question I wanted
Sure.
to ask. So you can finish.
No, I was wrapping up. Go ahead.
Oh, so I was just curious on the timing of monitoring. What time frame would those results be for? So what's being reported in August 2021, would that be for the 2021 school year?
And so with us tonight are a few distinguished guests. Director of Data Research and Accountability, Tim Krieger, is here. Associate Superintendent Mike Van Orden, Associate Superintendent Matt Gillingham. The four of us really got together and worked on this. And so I just want to make sure that my answer is accurate. So Tim, if what I'm saying is inaccurate, please let me know. And so those results really would be looking at the 2021 school year. And so it would be a similar cycle to what we typically do. And so it's the data that would be available at that time.
Okay, thanks.
Tim, do you have anything to add to that?
All right, let's press on.
No, nothing to add. That is correct.
Okay, great. And so typically our study sessions are a little more free flow of discussion. So if anybody has questions or comments, I would say just jump in and add as we go along here. So why don't I go ahead at this point and pull up the document that I shared with you earlier today, and why don't we go through result one, talk through the indicators and the data elements, and then do questions, comments, review, and kind of finalize result one, and then move on to result two, and then result three, just so that we can capture any changes that we want to make or additions and whatnot. And so what you'll find by and large with result one is that the majority of data, and really as you can see, the majority of the data up above or at the very top of this chart is in green indicating that that data will be available in the timeline that's stated and that there is no update needed. Yellow, as indicated below, is really we have questions about whether that data will be available. If it is available, definitely it can be used in a similar format to past years. And so for result one, really the only change or deviation from standard practice is the PSAT. And right now the College Board is determining if that will be offered in the fall as typical, because typically all of our 10th grade students take the PSAT. Tim, do you want to give us an update on what the College Board is thinking about in terms of the PSAT and whether or not that will be available?
Yeah. Earlier in the summer, they loosened some of the rules on the PSAT. In the past, there have been rules that said if you offer the PSAT as a district, it all has to be on the same day. If you do 10th and 11th graders, they have to be on the same day. All schools within the district have to do the same day. They loosened those rules at the start of the summer to allow us to do multiple days. With the most recent announcement of many districts across the nation, it's possible they might either offer online or potentially to move the assessment. So I'm just sort of in constant communication with the College Board to see how they're going to potentially adjust the PSAT assessment. And as a reminder, there's like two parts to this. There's the PSAT for 11th graders, which is the qualifying exam for the NMSQT scholarship. And then the 10th graders who actually take the PSAT and NMSQT, though they can't qualify for a scholarship, they just happen to take that same test in grade 10.
Okay, and so since there's not a lot of changes being offered in Result 1, are there any questions that board members have about Result 1 or changes that you would recommend to this recommendation?
I have a question in regards to, these are all very quantitative. And so there was always the question I have is, do our students believe they are graduating college and career ready? What is their perception and how is that playing out? We haven't ever addressed that, but this seems like this year might be a good time in which to do so, and it might actually change some of our indicators in the long run from an informational standpoint. Because that perception of whether or not they feel ready, I think, is actually of value in looking at it. But it's a different indicator than what's there. So I don't know if you've considered any qualitative approaches in which to get at some of this.
And so really what we did was take the indicators that were just approved this last year and then see how we could apply them in the current setting. What we didn't do was then say, are there indicators that we would want to add, change, modify beyond what was adopted this last year? So that isn't work that we did.
And that might be something that's board work in regards to actually holding some of those linkages to ask those questions to then go from there from an angle. So that actually might be in a different realm before it goes forward in that. So I just wanted to put that out there as a way to sort of deepen the information we get. I just know when we got this, it's good for a period of time, but it doesn't have the richness behind it in which to give you some better information to move on.
Great
Mark,
comments.
you want to jump in?
Hello?
You're on.
Okay, good, thank you. I can hear about half of what your conversation is sometimes. I had a thought as we're looking at this in the quantitative, but yet looking at what Sherry was talking about, qualitative assessment. I think we have a unique opportunity with this to make lemonade out of lemons. We've got a lot of students having to work from home for college. We've never had an opportunity to really try and survey our past graduates, 1 year, 2 years into the workforce, or 1 or 2 years into college. But given the circumstances of COVID, we might actually have that opportunity these days. And the idea of checking in with, Jim, how did we prepare you for what you're doing now? And because we know the parents' names from those days, we know the kids' names, it would seem to me that we have a kind of a unique opportunity to try and find out if our product was what they needed, if you will.
I agree with Director Bleasner and Director Stewart that there is, there is something to be said to the qualitative data of having that, hearing from our students as to whether they believe they're that they're graduating future ready. I think particularly if we lose the if we're losing the PSAT as that indicator, we may want to look at something to replace it for this coming year. Now, what the target ends up being, that's, we don't have any baseline data we could to pick from, but I'm on ER, for what's been presented here, that's great. I think we go forward with this, but if we are losing the PSAT as the metric for gauging that, I think there's a way to get that at that qualitatively.
Great. Okay. Any other board comments about Result 1? Okay.
No,
Nope.
I guess that's it.
Sorry, I thought I heard someone.
I think Chris said no. So
Okay, gotcha. I did. Okay, I'll move on to Result 2. As you can imagine, Result 2 has more variance than result one. Part of it is actually as we change data systems, that first indicator regarding dibbles would have shifted regardless. And so, we have a state requirement to monitor reading and literacy K1-2. And really, we report out in second grade here, but the Dibbles Next assessment for us is going away. It was transitioning systems anyway, but we're transitioning to Fastbridge as a data system which can provide literacy, math, and actually SEL assessment data for kindergarten through 8th grade students. And so that's why you see the proposed indicator there of looking at Fastbridge as the literacy measure moving forward. And we really only have one year comparison because we can do beginning of year to end of year with Fastbridge because it's something you do multiple times throughout the year. Tim, do you want to speak to this indicator at all and potentially anything about Fastbridge and the data that would be available for us?
So kind of big picture, we can imagine the end of year benchmark for Fastbridge is going to be similar. There's going to be basically a summative measure that we'll use for all students. We don't know at this point, is it going to be comparative? We're going to have to do some analysis and look at, I don't want to say the assessment harder, but are we going to see sort of similar results for our populations from Dibbles to Fastbridge? We would do all of that analysis prior to this report, so we could provide sort of the historical Dibbles information and then what's new in the Fastbridge. That's about as general as I can get right now.
Board members, any questions about that indicator specifically?
No.
Okay. Why don't we go on to the next one? Tim, I'm just going to have you just kind of discuss the state of SBA and some of the things you're thinking about.
So, as you know, we did not have any state testing this past spring. OSPI has put in their literature that they intend to seek a waiver for state testing for spring 2021, even though the opportunity to submit the waiver isn't available yet. They're just coming out of the gate and saying, hey, our intent is to pursue a waiver to not have state testing in 2021. So we sort of have two scenarios here. Is let's say that there is no waiver, we have to do state testing for our federal requirements, then we would have 2021 state assessments. We would skip the 2020 school year, we'd have the 2021 school year. We get those state assessments results back right away. We would have them ready for an August report. What we would not have for an August report if we had 2021 state assessments would be the comparative district data, because that isn't released until the fall. If the state does not have state assessments in 2021, our fallback for grades 3, 5, 8 would be the end of year Fastbridge data. And we would have the growth data for the BOY beginning of year to end of year for math and ELA. You'll see basically the ELA and the math assessment information is the same here. So in many ways, that's actually going to be a better data set because it's going to show a growth over the course of the school year. And let's say we have both, our intent is still to do Fastbridge even if we had state assessments.
Tim, you may have said this and I just missed it. When are they going to make the decision about SBA?
Well, the intent has already been released. I think it's going to be more of a federal requirement decision, meaning they were allowed a waiver for this spring. This is a federal testing requirement. Right. So if it's not offered. So it's not really a decision by OSPI. It's basically if they're allowed to. And I don't know when the timing to that could be.
Okay. Okay. And so really
Depend on.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry.
I was gonna say, might depend on who's
Go
in
ahead.
charge of the federal government. But anyway, yeah, okay.
So I've got a question on Fastbridge. We're talking about replacing Dibbles with Fastbridge, but Dibbles we've only been using K2. Are we talking about using Fastbridge all the way up to K8? Okay. And
Mike?
Yeah, so we've always been looking for, well, we've been looking for a more comprehensive assessment system. And so there's been some work around this for actually the last 2 years to look at various assessment platforms because we have been lacking, particularly in the math department as well, in terms of assessments to monitor progress in our math. So this allows us to do both math and literacy.
it does do math. And is Fastbridge something that we're going to be able to deploy on a remote learning basis?
Yes.
He's on top.
Mostly. So there's some caveats. For K1, it's really not an assessment that you can just say, hey, go do. We think grades 2 and maybe 3 and higher, it is something that they can do independently. They don't need a teacher to provide any information in terms of in Dibbles, it would be like the student and the teacher would be sitting next to each other and the student would be reading. So for the higher grades, probably about grade 3 and above, it can be done entirely independent. We do have a plan, though, to do it remotely with support from some of our teachers to do the assessment virtually.
Yeah.
That's quite a task to do, but we're actually planning to do it.
Oh, we're stuck in a situation where we've got to figure something out. So, okay, great.
Okay, any other questions about really ELA or math in this regard? Okay, Mike, do you want to talk at all about Fastbridge? Do you have any additional information about benefits, what types of data we'll get, implementation plan and timeline, things like that?
Yeah, just a few things. I think Chris hit on a little bit. To have data for multiple grade levels other than K2, I mean, if you just look at districts around the country, most have some kind of screening tool for literacy and math, as well as a way to monitor the progress of students over time. So what this is going to give us, as Tim was saying, is beginning of the year data, mid and end of the year data. It also gives us two kind of separate measures. One is we can compare to a local sample and a national sample to see how we compare to groups of students. And then it also gives us growth benchmarks to say, kids are on track to be at a particular grade level at a particular time in the year. So just a really nice, rich source of data for us to use. Again, for multiple grade levels, we can look at cohorts over time for multiple subjects. And the only other thing I'd add is the guidance we're getting from OSPI around all of our back to school plans, whether it's remote or hybrid, is you do need some way to check to see where kids are when they come back into school, and then you need a way to monitor their progress over time. So it really aligns with the guidance we're getting. It aligns with our MTSS efforts. I think it's way overdue, and it should give us some good information to look at. That, again, multiple grades, growth data, comparative data, it's pretty rich.
So, Mike, will that data be coming through as the same 3 touch points during the year, or is it richer than that?
I mean, 3 would probably be what we're shooting for. You can monitor more frequently than that if you need to. And what you typically do there is when you have students that you've identified as being more, needing more support, then you're going to monitor them more frequently. And so you might monitor them every 3 to 4 weeks. And then you're also layering in on top of that the interventions you're using. So if you say, okay, we're going to use this literacy tool, then you can actually show where you're implementing that, monitor the progress, and see if you're actually seeing growth. If not, you might need to adjust your intervention. You might need to have it be more intensive. You might need to try something else. So again, it gives you a lot more information to work with. And like you're saying, Chris, I think it gives you more frequent information for kids if you need it.
What's the burden in terms of time, classroom time, on doing this formative testing?
The main assessments, and Tim can correct me if I'm wrong, the last I heard is about 20, 30 minutes. The other nice thing is for the older grades, kids can sit down as a whole class. With Dibbles, you know, you're sitting individually with the student and going through, and it's very time intensive, where this one's a little more efficient.
Okay, thanks.
And I do want to point out, when people say, you know, how are you kind of improving the system through the closure, you know, this really is one of those things where, you know, it was on the roadmap for us, evaluating. We had our, you know, typical stakeholder group looking at a data system. They tried a couple out. They tested, you know, identified this one as the one to go with. And typically we would probably roll this out a little bit slower, but just given that we are returning to a place where we do need to actually determine student levels in literacy and mathematics, it just makes sense to do a broader rollout versus a smaller rollout that we typically would have done given standard conditions. So just wanted to point that out as well. All right. See, Tim, do you want to make any comments about the indicators about percent of grade 9 students earning full ELA credit or percent of EL students making sufficient progress?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, the last year, semester 2, we only have A's and incompletes. So the measure here is percent of grade 9 students earning full ELA credit with a grade of C or higher. So we basically have this little asterisk semester 2 of 2020 that's going to have all A's. There's not going to be any D's that are going to be in that data set. So when we do this, we're going to have the 2020 data asteriskized or whatever you say there, and then we'll have the 2021 data, which is why I think August is helpful, so that you have sort of the anomaly. This year will still be an anomaly, but hopefully a little bit more because we'll have typical grading. The data, the most recent data for that results in August will be the 2021 school year. And then the EL students making sufficient progress is measured on the ALPA 21. Off the top of my head, roughly 60–70% of our EL students, we finish EL testing. And so we do have this year, we have a set of students that didn't actually get the summative ALPA 21 assessment. So that's a limited data set. And then next year, we're going to have, depending on how OSPI guides us, we could actually have a larger set, because if the student didn't take the summative assessment, there is no way to exit EL services. And if OSPI says you must then continue that student in the absence of an assessment, we actually could have a higher amount of students in the next year exiting. So we still have the measure. It's just going to be, it's going to have a lot more analysis on it, and several just question marks. Any questions on the grades or EL?
Nope.
And really, that's grades for ELA and math. Okay. All right. So let's keep moving here. I don't think there's anything different in science. Is that correct, Tim? Similar decision point that will be made?
Yeah, the difference with science is there isn't a Fastbridge alternative. We can still use course grade data, but we don't have if there is no state assessment, the fallback on Fastbridge.
And so should there not be a science assessment, would we then write an indicator that looks at different grade levels through the system and assigned grades? Is that what I think I heard you say?
Yeah, because somewhere in here, so you'll see that the next measure is the earning full science credit with a grade of C. So the question would be, do we want to put in a middle school science grade measure to basically serve as the sort of the grade 8 science indicator, and or the elementary strand data for science. It's a lot more squishy, but that would be the next best alternative.
Gotcha. Board members, any questions about science specifically?
No, that works. I don't know. It'd be nice if we had a better, in the absence of the SBA, we had a better indicator, but I think that's the best we can do. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't really, I know I would usually be worried about this, but I'm not. This is something where this year, if you can just get the assessments working for math and ELA, I will be happy.
And so maybe that's a good question. Do we, if we don't have the assessment data from science, would the board rather we just pause that monitoring for a year since there isn't another data set that you would want us to use for this indicator?
It's a really good question.
Essentially, it'd be very similar to, social studies. We don't have an assessment for social studies, so our only indicator for social studies is basically social studies credit by grade 10 with grade of C or higher. So if you use the same logic, if there is no assessment, you would basically default to the grade 9 earning full science credit with a grade of C as the only thing for science.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, my thought is, it's our job to monitor the organization, and we use the best we have, the best tool we have to do that. And while it may not be as telling as other tools, I think we should continue.
The piece I think that might be interesting in science is the type of science that's being taken across. I mean, that's the challenge, is ninth grade science isn't consistent. It could be biology, it could be chemistry, it could be physics, it could be earth science, I think is the other one that's there. Mm-hmm. So how do you incorporate that piece? And part of it, I think of this from an equity side, are we doing well at ensuring that our students can access all those different sciences equitably across the board? So earth sciences, chemistry, physics, and I know that's dependent on schools. So, but I would agree with Chris as well, that saying there's a lot going on this year where that's not necessarily a top priority to pull off.
Okay. So I think what I'm hearing is if we have the Washington Comprehensive Assessment of Science that we report it. If we don't, then we'll just use the grade 9 students earning full science credit as the science indicator because that's where we have data.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, just taking some notes here. Let's see, Tim, the next set are really green, but I know we have notes in here. Do you want to speak to any of these and provide context?
So all of the grade data, I think we're just going to have the analysis include some information about I'm going to call it the A-only semester. And then this coming school year will be the first year on civics. We will have to skip a year on the grades 3 and 5 students with the 3 or higher in information and communication technology because there were no grades semester 2 for elementary, and many of these strands, sometimes the teacher does it first semester and or second semester, so there's no consistent measure there. I think that's actually my only commentary.
Is our rule for information and communication technology semester 2? Or is it when it's graded? It's okay. If you don't have it right there in front of you, I was curious about that. And so a longitudinal look at that indicator, would it just have a blank in 1920?
Yep.
But show the other years?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Okay, So that is results 2. Board members, any kind of overall comments or questions or things you want to say about results 2? Because that's our recommendation for how we'll proceed with this monitoring report.
I just have a question in regards, I know that the Aspen group had done a lot of reviewing of this and provided sort of their feedback on these and the evaluation. How was that incorporated into this process and into these?
So overall,
Suggestions.
yeah. So what I was thinking of doing with that group is post this discussion is actually sitting down with them and kind of walking through what we're planning on doing to get their feedback. They gave feedback into all of these indicators as part of the process that the board and Dr. Stavum went through over the last 2 years. And so their feedback is embedded into these indicators as part of the development process, but not part of the 2021 monitoring process.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
I was just trying to get a consistency across. I know with the operational expectations, there was a lot, and you had sheets that were, I don't think with the results we had as much written specifically in regards to as we did with the operational expectations. So I was just trying to be reminded. So I know there were challenges with the way this was put forward, and I know when I saw the reports, I didn't find them to be as informative as I would have liked them to have been. And I think that's a challenge with the indicators, not anything to do with anything behind it. So.
Right. Okay.
This works.
Okay.
Works for me.
Great. So results 3. So a couple of these are recommendations that we would have brought regardless, and some are related to school closure and data availability. And so this first indicator, we're recommending that we actually break it out into 3 specific indicators, where the current indicator looks at 3 or higher on all of the ISAs, the interdisciplinary skills and attributes for elementary students. The recommendation is actually to break them out to be a little bit more descriptive around what we're reporting on. And so it's proposed to do the same monitoring, but at the level of participates in class discussion and demonstrates effort, respects others and cooperates and shares responsibility in a group and follows school rules, and completes work on time and follows directions and is attentive and organizes workspace and materials. With that, I want to ask Matt to speak to why was this the recommendation moving forward based on last year's work and reporting?
Yeah, so I think what I gave comment to when presenting R3 was by grouping all of the interdisciplinary skills and attributes together, we had set ourselves up where essentially if students didn't meet in one area, they would essentially show up as a negative in how we were looking at our results. And when we look at all the different indicators, you could have a student who might not be organizing their workspace, but if we were, but that they're actually, they're showing resilience, demonstrating effort, participating in class discussions. So by breaking this up and chunking it into some smaller groups, we can better align these with specific indicators of the policy or specific aspects of the policy. And so rather than completely remove this as an indicator, saying that let's, this way we can better align them with specific elements of the policy.
Okay, given that that's a substantive change, board members, comments, questions?
Good call. Makes sense.
Breaking them out makes sense. I have to admit, just in the process of doing so, you've triggered my general aversion to punishing introverts for not participating. But you know, I've fought that battle before. I don't need to bring it up again today. For me, a lot of this stuff is relative to where that kid is on the spectrum from introvert to me.
I think this works great.
Okay. All right. So why don't
Oh,
we?
Mark's hand.
Oh,
went up.
sorry.
Yeah. I've got a little bit of a problem. It goes almost to Chris's quote of the introvert, but also now that we're trying to assimilate our classes between the special needs kids and the typical students, and we're trying to do co-teaching and so forth, this measurement seems very harsh on those students. It almost seems discriminatory. And tell me, I don't want to accuse anyone of that. It's just the way it presents itself. If we're going to have true inclusion, this kind of a measurement is going to really screw up your the way you look at students. If you're going to have true inclusion. And I don't mean we're doing this evilly. I think it's a factor of the measurement. Just as Chris has talked about before, of the student who's shy, introverted, whatever, and they don't participate in class. Well, you start blending your special needs kids in there, and their participation is going to be very different than your typical students. Now, it can be sought out. It can be pulled out, if you will, almost, but it's going to take a uniquely talented instructor that knows how to work with a student with limited speech and those kind of disabilities.
Yeah. You know, when our general education teachers are, because these are all specific elements that come directly from the report card. And so when a teacher is doing their grading, if he or she is grading a student in these areas and that student has an IEP, typically the practice is they reach out to the special education service provider to then have that conversation. Let's say that student isn't participating in class, but maybe that student demonstrates it differently. And so there's a collaboration between general education teacher and special education teacher. We also have, if you will, and Tim, you can kind of help me with the correct language here. I believe we actually have essentially a rubric that teachers use to evaluate each of these. And I believe it accommodates for some of what we're talking about. Tim, do you have that?
Yeah, I mean, I'd also add, we do have, if a student's receiving services in a certain area, on the report card, it'll refer to the student's progress, their IEP progress report, not necessarily scored based on the general education requirements for that area. Does that make sense? So if a student is receiving, and this is for any area, the report card will basically have an asterisk, will refer them to their IEP progress report. They wouldn't actually they wouldn't be included in this measure if that was the case. Is that the question that you were asking?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's helpful.
I do think this result does bring up some of those challenges, and this is actually something probably for the board to think about as well, in regards to equity and how representative are these of the diverse population that's out there, and how do we make sure that we're not creating the situations as mentioned with Mark and Chris. And I think that's an analysis to do it in a process of, have we reflected these effectively for the diverse community and students that we have, or do they need to be changed and adapted as well? I'm not sure we've done that work enough, but this is, again, it's what we currently have, doesn't mean it's right. And I do think it's of value to take an equity lens to really think about this in regards to these attributes. Do they hold across the board?
And Tim, we have the availability or ability to actually disaggregate this with our student demographics as well, correct?
Yes, and we actually did do that in the R3 when we had it as that, basically that measure that included all 8 together.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
All right, I think we're good.
Okay. Let's see, Tim, do you want to speak to this next one that's in red?
Yeah, so grade 8, all the students are going to have a pass or a no credit. So it's difficult to do a C+ or higher measure for those students. Now in grade 10, we do have grades for semester 2. They're all the same grade. So this is similar to what we talked about in R2, with the exception that for grade 8, it's just going to be a little bit more messy because we're going to have to like pull out that year and just again mark it as these are students that were passing all of their core academic classes, and then we'll have the 2021 data, which will go back to the grade data. So it's going to be messy a little bit, and honestly, I'm still trying to figure out like how visually we're going to show that to ensure that we don't say something that really isn't true, while at the same time trying to show sort of a general trend.
Is it something where we show that trend? We have absent data in one year, but then in a subsequent table or statement even, we just make a statement about student performance at the 8th grade level, referencing the PF grading and referencing 10th grade performance at the AI. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I get, really putting two things on the same chart and connecting them with a line, it's very worrisome to me. So that would help solve that.
And so really our proposed indicator, multi-year trend in the last column will not include 2019, 2020 grading, correct?
Right, yeah, I mean, it'll skip the grade data, but like you said, I think we would, wait, sorry, I'm looking at two different things. Yeah, I mean, I think we're not quite clear on that. I said, I don't think the trend would include the semester 2.
Right.
Because I don't know how we're going to trend that. So
Yep.
I think we need to just reference the grade 8 data for 2019, 2020, but not put them together.
Yep. Okay.
John and Tim, I'm wondering, so it sounds like this one is we're still noodling. I'm wondering if we can get just like in board brief, I guess we're an email or something, some update on your thinking in advance of when we get it as a report for how you're going to handle this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I just didn't include the word "not" in that last column. Because it's really about the multi-year trend. We're not going to report out the 1920 data because it's not really reportable in that manner. And so, but yes.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Okay. Let's see, Tim, do you want to talk at all about, looks like this next one down, we'll be able to report out using the A-only semester.
Yeah. So that's similar to the information we already presented in R2. the Panorama, that's going to be dependent on the ability to deliver it in a valid, reliable way. So this is, as a reminder, this is the sort of the climate survey that we give, and the two measures are social awareness and emotional regulation. And we are meeting with Panorama soon, I think actually this week, to look at what are the possibilities regarding how do you deliver this in either an online way, and or if we're going to do it in the spring, hoping we're back in session. So.
And if we don't have this data, would we propose something else, or no data reporting in that for that indicator? And that could be a question for Matt as well.
Yeah,
we don't have a better alternative than this, honestly. So this is more about the timing. This is I think actually better than the PSAT. It's similar to the PSAT. It's better though because we have a little bit more control on when we can administer it. The PSAT, we're at the mercy of the College Board options that they provide us. This, we have some flexibility on, are we going to do it in the fall? If we can't do it in the fall, we could do it in the spring. If we're going to do it at both, is one more reliable than the other? Those are kind of the questions we're looking at right now.
Gotcha. Matt, did you want to comment about Panorama?
Tim actually did a better job, but I think that we talked, it kind of gets back to like where we use the interdisciplinary skills and attributes, is where we have, for this particular policy, a lot of where we're having to do with data is we're either using, we're doing things that are adults' interpretation of students' behavior, or we're having to extrapolate kind of a degree removed from certain data sets, like we're going to talk about absenteeism here in a second, or we're using perception survey. And so I think, so students kind of own self-reporting. So I don't think we have a good replacement if we're unable to have that self-reporting piece, particularly at the secondary level, because we don't have sort of an adult observational data set to replace it.
Okay. Board members, any questions about that one? Okay, Matt.
I guess a question. So it's for Tim, maybe. I see here that your notes are that for Panorama, it needs to be delivered. I guess we can learn something even if we're not able to have every student take it, right? As long as there's some sort of reliable sample, right? Do I have that right?
Yes, and then I'd say, and I think one of the things we're looking at Panorama is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, is the surveys that we would be providing in the past, would those actually be the most appropriate to be providing potentially in the fall for a remote setting? So we want to get, valid and useful social emotional data, and they may actually have a better survey for the fall that would actually give us actionable information for where kids are in their current world. That may be slightly different than this measure, and then it might actually be later in the spring, when we could either do a smaller sample or the full set on these actual ones.
Yeah, and Tim, I think points out is that we use the Panorama survey data, for multiple reasons, primarily for, helping inform at the school level how best to support students, and particularly thinking about the type of programming that a school needs to kind of adapt in order to support student needs of either particular cohorts of students or just school-wide. So we will most likely continue forward with a fall survey, the question that Tim gets on is it going to be of sufficient kind of quality that would be something that we would use for reporting against this policy? But it would have value at the school level regardless.
Matt, do you want to take a shot at the next one as well, and why we don't have a proposed modification at this point?
Yeah, and Tim could probably back me up. I know he's been trying to live in this, trying to figure out how we're going to be taking attendance, and that is not something that OSPI has issued guidance around yet. And so given that we don't know what that looks like, we do not have a plan for how we would use student attendance data against this policy.
And they're assuring us that they'll get it to us before the school year starts?
I think that, from an equity standpoint, being able to gauge the students that are accessing our system is going to be crucial for this year. I think this is it's kind of troubling to me that we don't have anything right now, and I get why, but if I think about what are some of the most important metrics for this coming year, to me, this is one of them. So,
and I jump in. I'd say we actually we have many metrics we could use. The question is which of those are going to convert into a reportable attendance measure to OSPI. So, like, for example, I think Mindy mentioned we have the ability to report now on Teams meetings. So a teacher, when they have their class meeting, there'll be a metric on who was in the class and when they came in. And the teacher will also have metrics on how much the student accessed the team site. So we have actually quite a bit of online activity measures. The question is, though, what are the business rules by which that actually goes through some process to ultimately, in the end, we have to report essentially one of four things to OSPI: a full day or half day absent, and whether it's excused or unexcused. Those are like the things that we tell them, right?
Yeah. Tim, can I jump in? Because I think there's another thing that around the attendance data that we need to continue to have a conversation around is our data, it kind of comes back to is that we use data for different purposes. So we definitely want to be using attendance data to be monitoring and thinking about to what extent are students engaging, and are there barriers to that engagement that are within our locus of control that we need to be changing, right? So if it's access to hotspots, if it's communication to know how to get logged in, if it's that our instructional approaches are not engaging or responsive, right? So there's all these reasons why students might not engage, or that students need additional supports and we need to figure out how to connect them with. So I think that's one purpose for attendance, and we have an interest to really pay close attention. But if we bring it back to the results policy, and one of the challenges we have with like the chronic absenteeism as a data set is we were looking at that and we were making that connection to 3.10, taking personal responsibility. And kind of our thinking was students who come to school are taking personal responsibility. And when I shared out the results, one of the challenges is that may be true for the majority of students, but there's reasons why students might not come to school that has nothing to do with their ability or interest to take personal responsibility, and can actually be it can be something that's an external factor. So so it's a data set that is where we're having to read some things into it, and it's maybe more reflective of us as an organization, but not necessarily about to what extent are we developing the attributes in our students. So But it is a data set we have, and as long as if the board feels that kind of extrapolating that meets its interest, it's one we can continue to use. This year, as Tim said, we just need to figure out what the business rules are to say how we're going to report it out for the purpose of monitoring this result policy.
And so maybe what would be helpful from the board is in this indicator, knowing that we're going to have to propose it at a future date, what values do you want us to make sure that we are aligning with as we develop this, knowing that this is a really crucial indicator this year in particular? And so maybe we could just take some comments in that regard as we're thinking about this, knowing that there are many, many different ways and data points that we could consider as attending.
So I'm sort of thinking aloud here, if you permit me. And I guess I'm trying to think out what is it that we are hoping to learn from chronic absence, from the metric we had before, and what is that? What attributes of students is that telling us about? It's I don't know. I'm really wrestling with that. I guess. I'm thinking about what does that tell us? It's whether they have these app skills, ability to literally show up every day and persevere. I'm like super serious. You bail me out here as I keep trying to think through this.
Yeah,
I'm really wrestling with this because I think this is a really good question that I'm not able to put my finger on.
I think it's a similar question to what Chris brought up in regards to introverts, that Mark brought up in regards to special needs. It's what are you looking at in regards to this? I see attendance as actually the process measure that looks at, do we get academic gains? Because that's what the connection to is. So in some regards, it actually belongs under results too, because if they don't attend, they're not going to get the academic gain. And so I get this. I think it is I remember when we saw this data, I also thought, oh, this isn't very helpful or useful in really making me think that we're succeeding at this result. But this is important to me when I try to think about, are you going to learn math? Well, have you engaged in school in order to do so? So it's a process versus an outcome measure. And we're trying to make it an outcome.
Yeah, but other people have hands up. But I do think there is an outcome component to this too. And I that's what I'm wrestling with. Mark, sorry, your hand's been up. And Cassandra too.
Yeah. Whichever one wants to go first, I don't care. Whatever. I'll go ahead.
Go ahead, Mark.
My concern with this measurement is that from an equity lens, for a economically disadvantaged student, in other words, a kid from the poor side of town, if you will, such as most of my friends, it seems to me that sometimes if he's turning in the work or she's turning in the work, and yet has an attendance problem, that's one thing. If they're not turning in the work, then that's an even worse situation. My concern is you've got students who may be helping their families with jobs and their attendance is irregular because of it, or because their parents have 2 jobs that don't allow them to work from home. They have to sometimes stay home to look after siblings who may either be sick or because of the COVID situation, it's making it difficult for them to be able to sit in one place while having to chase after little sister or little brother. So I want us to be very careful as we start to look more at equity and we look at socioeconomic as well as race and as well as ability. It bothers me. It bothers me that perhaps this is a measurement that if the work is being done, that's one thing. And if it's quality work, but if you're, I hope you see where I'm going.
Yeah, I think,
do.
Well, can I comment
Yeah.
on the term chronic absenteeism? And Matt can chime in here too around kind of what's behind that term. Chronic absenteeism means that you've missed 10% of your school year, which means 18 days, which means about 2 days per any school month. And historically, the outcomes for students that reach the threshold of missing 10% are very dire. Failing in school, dropout rates, graduation rates, all of those are substantially less for students that are experiencing chronic absenteeism. And so I think why is it an important data element? Because if we have students that are reaching that threshold, well, there should be systems that are embedded into our schools where we are reaching out, we're working with, and there are. We have attendance specialists, we have our counselors. So there's things in place for that as well. And so I think this is more a measure of our systems versus labeling a student as chronically absent, if that helps. Matt, do you want to talk at all about the kind of the other outcomes piece related to this?
Well, so I think that's what we're kind of wrestling with is that student attendance. If you're thinking about it at an individual level, the question is that is to what extent is that a reflection of some of the interests that the board has articulated in the results policy, and specifically we aligned it with take personal responsibility. And yet, as Mark, you talked about, there's a host of reasons why a student may not be attending that don't have anything to do with take personal responsibility. So it's an imperfect measure for the results policy. It's a very important measure as we use it as a kind of a leading indicator for both at an individual student level and as an organizational level in looking at where, because students with who are chronically absent are at greater risk for having adverse academic outcomes. And so it is an incredibly important indicator that we want to pay attention to and use it kind of like as an early warning signal. Student attendance as an early warning signal of students that might need additional supports. Okay. But I think our question tonight is, to what extent does it relate to the results policy?
So I hear the importance of it on an educational level, but that's for the metric that we actually know what it means, which is absenteeism in the context of in-person. And what I'm concerned is that we're trying to rapidly force this new metric of did they show up for a virtual class into that box. My druthers on this would be to have you report out over this coming year about, I remember back in the spring, things about just how many kids had not shown up yet. That matters a lot. But it's a new metric that we're grappling with. Until we've got all the kids capable of showing up, and for a given week we've got fewer than X percent of them who haven't shown up to any class, I'm not worried about chronic absenteeism from the 2 days per month definition. Yes, I understand that historically that matters, but realistically, we're in this special world where getting even up to that level, I'd consider something of success. Anyway.
And so I guess, so maybe a different question than what I asked before is, would the board rather just have a similar reporting structure as we did last year around some of the key indicators, which included what you just described, Chris, and just not report out on the indicator of avoiding chronic absenteeism, and just discuss that indicator further at a later date, whether or not we even want it as part of the results 3.
Right. I like.
Cassandra's had her hand raised for a long time, so.
No, I did want to reiterate Mark's concern about equity, and I think all of us have now touched on that, and your ability to even, in your family situation, log on. That does concern me if a student has not accessed a lesson. I'm assuming that there's a lot of students who will not be able to do synchronous learning because of responsibilities with siblings or other reasons that are happening in the house. And yeah, I would love to see what we did spring quarter as far as who has at least accessed and who has actually submitted work. I would like to see renewed efforts on reaching the students who really aren't doing any of those things, but not to judge them by what might be happening in their homes.
Yeah.
So Eric, I think the question that I have, because you know, our hope is to walk away so that we can start working on, you know, our monitoring for the year. And if we want to delay the decision around this specific indicator, I think we're fine with that. Or if the board would just like this one paused for a year, and then we have a different discussion at a later date about results 3 in general, and then this specifically, we can do that for 2021 as well.
Well, what I'm hearing from the board, and I think I'm now in agreement too, that if what we're trying to measure is the attribute of personal responsibility, that we, you know, how often a student is regularly we don't think how often a student is interacting or attending virtually is necessarily a good measure. So what I'm hearing is we want to pause this for a year. Siri?
I would agree with that. That's what I heard. I also think the other piece, though, is speaking to having a more continual monitoring, which we did in the spring, in regards to these process measures in how is it playing out. I think that's what Director Sage was speaking to, if I'm not mistaken. And so I think there's two things. You have the process of what we're doing, how is it going, and this is so the formative versus summative. I mean,
Right.
Really, that's what we're speaking to. The results report is the summative reports, and I would agree. I don't think attendance needs to be there.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's valuable on the process side and the formative side.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of what Tim was talking about in the Technology and Information Services update tonight, that building out the dashboard as this becomes clearer to us in the organization, then we would then build that into the dashboard as well and provide updates and analysis to that. So, okay, that makes sense. Matt, do you want to talk to this next, avoiding behaviors resulting in discipline?
Yeah, so as Tim's we have indicated there that the data is not going to be comparable, and it's a little bit a similar kind of conversation regarding that we just had around chronic absenteeism, which is what we're using a data set that we have, and we're kind of drawing some conclusions about the ways in which that reflects upon the values that the board's articulated in R3. And so I think in this case, taking personal responsibility, respecting value others. And so, you know, and it's kind of, you know, that the idea is that if you avoid behaviors that result in discipline, then you're demonstrating those things. And so again, it's kind of a little bit of an extrapolation. We know that there's still a lot of subjectivity and bias when it comes to discipline and so again, I think this is one where we'll have some data. We don't quite yet know what that will look like, and particularly starting in a remote environment. And we don't know how that's going to be comparable. So Tim, do you have any on the reporting side? Any other things beyond that I've said?
No, I mean, it's reportable, but the number of suspensions and expulsions in a remote environment are going to be, I would imagine, significantly smaller.
I would imagine so as well. So it probably it's something that this year will have limited value, and then there's also the question of the extent in which we're drawing some pretty big conclusions about the extent to which this data set reflects the values in the policy.
That's right.
Okay,
Yeah.
board member comments or questions?
Yeah, I think that's right. I don't know how telling that's going to be as any student attributes this year. But I think we all recognize that. I'd still like to see it reported. Mark? You're on mute. Mark, did you have something you wanted to add?
Come on.
There
I
you
can hear
are.
you now, at least.
There we go.
Yeah.
I won't breathe on it. I can understand the idea of the discipline problem being something you want to track for a symptom of an underlying problem, the same way you did of chronic absenteeism. Again, I think that, again, it can be an early warning system, a sign of something else. Trouble at home, trouble with whatever it might be. I remember the kid that was one of my son's peer tutors, and the kid was constantly getting in fights. But when he was in school and he was JT's peer tutor, and he walked into choir with him, that changed from the accused thug, if you will, to a guy that I would have loved to see as a para someday, because he was engaging, he was getting JT involved with the other kids. I mean, he was fantastic, but yet he had some issues, if you will, and I'm sure it affected his academic performance only because he kept getting kicked out.
Yeah, I think when and that's the thing, right? We're talking about children who are developing, and we all sometimes, the context in which we're acting and behavior is a form of communication. There's a lot that's there. We actually, I think around some of our interests around looking at our discipline data probably more speak to OE10 and some refinement around our learning environment, particularly looking at disproportionality as where this is probably a better data set. So, but we could keep it in here with R3, but I think it's just the board should know that we're drawing some fairly broad conclusions from this data set to reflect against the policy.
Yeah. All right, that makes sense. All right, so we've got a couple more.
Yeah, I'll just speak to the last two that we're recommending removing.
Hold on, Matt, before you go, I just want to make sure we're clear on, we're going to report discipline in R3 as we have in the past, knowing that there could be further conversation later? Is that where we landed with that?
I'm nodding my head.
You are, okay, okay.
I'm only speaking for myself. I don't know that I heard. I think so. If anyone else disagrees.
No, that was my understanding too.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. All right, go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, so the last two measures we're recommending that we remove. The first one is the students reporting opportunities for involvement in school activities on the Healthy Youth Survey. And then the second one is students participating in district athletics. And these were both connected with students maintaining balance. And so with the Healthy Youth Survey, again, the way that question is framed is whether they have the opportunity to do so, which may be more reflective again as we think of like an OE. But doesn't actually say that students do take advantage of opportunities. Also, I'm not sure if we'll have Healthy Youth Survey data yet. They haven't announced how they're going to be doing that. We're set to do that in 2020, and that's always been a paper pencil thing. So I'm not even sure if we'll have that data set. But even if we did, it's problematic because again, we're kind of taking a couple of leaps to draw the conclusion that just because a kid says that they have the opportunity at school is somehow reflective of their maintaining balance. Similarly, with the students participating in district athletics, I think we have an interest that students are participating in athletics. But we also have an interest in students participating in activities or students participating in other aspects of school life, or maybe things that are outside of the school that provide them with that sense of balance that may have nothing necessarily to do with us. And so it is kind of a bit of extrapolation. I mean, we have student athletes who are probably not maintaining balance because they're stretching themselves too thin. So again, it's another one where it's kind of been this imperfect measure that we're really having to draw some really broad conclusions. Just as an organization, I'm more concerned with us paying attention to who is participating in our athletics and activities and who is not, and paying attention to how do we ensure that all students actually do have opportunities and that we're creating those opportunities. But I don't know that measure actually reflects, again, the attributes that we're wanting to develop in our students. So that's why we're recommending removing those two measures.
See, do we have any board member comments or questions about either of these and that recommendation?
Do you want to chime in? Then Siri.
This one's always bothered me, to be quite frank, since I started on the board. I went to work when I was in the 8th grade and worked all the way through high school. And did I have time to go and do extracurricular activities? I was able to do it because those classes were classes and not clubs. Well, we have a debate club. Well, they had a debate class, and that enabled me to do that activity. We have journalism clubs or newspaper clubs. I had classes for those things, and it trained me to be able to go to college, whereas I don't think our clubs are doing that. And to judge a person by whether or not they can participate in the club, or as soon as they're getting out the school door, they're hightailing it to a job. That to me is, again, when you look at their equity issue, that stinks. think it's kind of elitist.
So, Mark, is what you're saying that you are in favor of removing these two measures?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I would like to, and to be quite frank, in the bigger picture of it, I would like to see us start looking at some of those clubs as why aren't those clubs classes? And don't tell me it's because we can't find a teacher, because we put an effort into. I'm sure we can find. Give them temporary credentials because they come from a state that we don't. Probably the only one we credential is Michigan, besides Washington, which is stupid. Anyway,
Sure, you want to jump in?
that's my soapbox.
So in looking at, and so with the difficulty that you find that this is what we have and it's really not getting at what we need for a multitude of different things around it, it seems to me that yet again, we might want to be considering, do we create our own question? I mean, we survey our students. Isn't there a way we could ask these questions very gently? You know, how do you feel about your school life balance? Do you have, you know, have you been able to participate in a sport? Do you have work? And so then we can do it our own way. Has there been discussion around, because I get why they don't work, absolutely. At the same time, if we're trying to look at these interactive things from a school thing and then how we support these in our students, because I think the goal is not to be judging our students. It is actually to be monitoring our system. And so this is ideally giving an example of, are we as a system giving opportunities for our students to develop these skills through these ways, so that you can get to different. So I'm hesitant to just throw things out without actually thinking about how do we not lose it for another way.
Yeah, I think there's two different things. So I think we have the Panorama Survey, and so we can add. These would be areas where we can work with them to identify replacement items that at least have the students indicate the level to which they have the ability to maintain balance, as an example, right? Like, so if we don't have an actual, kind of a quantitative data set that we can rely on, asking the students and having them reflect back the extent to which they feel that we're developing them with these towards these skills is the direction that I think we should be going. And then in terms of the, like for district athletics, or activities. So there's some, rounding out our data systems and looking at the extent to which those opportunities are available. And again, that kind of gets more into OE10, right? And where we're thinking about, as an organization, have we, to what extent are we creating a 10.2 inclusive, equitable, welcoming, safe school environment, and we can look at some of our programs and the extent and who's participating as ways of answering how we're doing against that.
No, okay, absolutely. So I have no problem getting rid of them. I just hate not to have something that's also continuing to. This has always been a difficult area. I actually think there's work to be done in general around R3 as what are these attributes, as I said earlier, and what this means. But I hate to throw the baby out with the bathwater, sort of thing.
And Matt, is that something that you think, if we're able to do Panorama this year, that we could include in the survey this year, or is there a longer runway for that?
No, it's a pretty short runway. So that would be something, and I know Tim and I are meeting with them later this week. So that would be something that we can look at what additional items we can and should be adding, and go through the policy. And so we could come back to say that if there's some other items that we think we'll be able to add that would better speak to R3.
Well, and I also heard some questions around perception data around R1 as well. And so, anyways, we don't need to have that conversation here, but if we're thinking about adding perception questions to Panorama, I wonder if that's another opportunity as well with the R1.
All
Any-
right.
And so I just want to make sure, again, I'm clear, I think the board is okay with us removing this measure, and we need to find some replacement data for a few of these where perception data actually might give us a better sense of outcomes.
I think that's right. I think that's right. And I can't, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting which ones from R2 where we're interested in, or maybe it was R1 where we're interested in perception data. But I do think that's worth, now that you've raised that, I do think it's worth looking into whether it's something we can get that data for the upcoming year.
Yeah, in the R1, it was in the absence of PSAT saying
Right.
students are college and career ready, actually asking students, and really even if we have PSAT, it's a good question to ask and include in our analysis.
Yeah, okay, I agree.
Okay. Well, I believe that brings us to the end of our data sheet here. And so I just want to say thank you to Tim for working on this, knowing that the amount of work all of us have right now in working to reopen schools is tremendous. And this is really important work to set us up for the year, to make sure that we're all clear in terms of monitoring reports, what the board is interested in. And it sounds like there's just some further policy work to be done, and we can do that throughout the year as well. And so, Eric, I believe that's all we have.
Okay. I think that's the end of our agenda. So I'm just trying to think if I need to add anything else before we adjourn. I don't think so. We're all set. So we're back August. I don't have it in front of me.
10th, August 10th.
Great. Sorry, I'm distracted. I'm holding, here, I'll put the camera back. I'm holding a baby right now as we're doing this. So, this is Jack, everyone.
What,
First
you're not
meeting.
a juggler?
Yeah.
Best excuse ever.
Yeah.
It is a good
okay,
excuse.
so that's it. Let's turn the camera back off. So we're all set. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you in a couple weeks.
Yep.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.
Have a good night.
Okay, good night.